dust blood, and the deafening screech of tearing metal. When a Black Hawk drops from the sky into a hostile urban maze, the survival clock starts ticking. Command ordered everyone to hold the perimeter. But for one female SEAL sniper protocol was simply a death sentence for her brothers. The ambient temperature in the sprawling war-torn district of District 9 hovered just above 112 degrees, but the sweat pooling at the nape of Chief Petty Officer Cassidy O'Connor's neck was entirely ice-cold. Lying prone on the crumbling rooftop of a 5-story concrete factory, Cassidy was perfectly still. To the naked eye, she was just another pile of grey rubble, a phantom draped in a dusty ghillie suit that seamlessly blended into the urban decay. Through the optics of her heavily modified Mark 13 sniper rifle, however, she was the deadliest force in the sector. She was a Tier 1 operator, one of the exceptionally rare female Navy SEALs to not only survive the grueling selection process, but to dominate the sniper qualification course. She didn't just shoot, she solved ballistic mathematics in the blink of an eye, while her heart hammered against her ribs. Beside her, Petty Officer 3rd Class Daniel Brooks, her spotter, peered through his high-powered spotting scope. His breathing was measured, but the tension radiating off him was palpable. "Target package is secure," Brooks whispered, his voice barely carrying over the distant rhythmic pop of small arms fire, echoing through the city. "Ground assault force is moving to the extraction point. I have visual on the birds." Cassidy didn't reply. She kept her eye pressed to the scope, scanning the labyrinth of narrow streets, blown-out storefronts, and rusted corrugated roofs that formed a kill zone around the designated landing zone. The mission had been a textbook snatch and grab. The assault team had breached a fortified compound, secured a high-level munitions smuggler, and were now waiting for their ride home. In the distance, the low, rhythmic thumping of rotor blades began to vibrate through the soles of Cassidy's boots. 2 UH-60. Black Hawk helicopters call signs Viper. 2-1 and Viper 2-2 swept in low over the city skyline. They were moving fast, skimming the rooftops to avoid radar and anti-aircraft fire. "Viper 2-1 is on the deck," Brooks reported, as the first chopper flared and settled into the dusty courtyard below. Operators poured out of the compound, shoving the hooded prisoner into the back of the aircraft. "Viper 2-2 is entering holding pattern," Cassidy muttered, tracking the second Black Hawk as it banked hard to the left, providing aerial overwatch for the extraction. Through the magnification of her scope, she could see the crew of Viper 2-2 clearly. Warrant Officer Bradley Mitchell was at the controls, his helmeted head turning sharply as he scanned the blind alleys below. In the door, Crew Chief Wyatt Miller was leaning out against his harness, his hands gripping the handles of an M134 minigun. They were sitting ducks, hovering just a few hundred feet above a hornet's nest. "Movement," Cassidy said sharply, the crosshairs of her reticle snapping to a shadowy balcony 3 blocks east of the landing zone. Second floor blue shutters. Long weapon. Before Brooks could calculate the windage, a blinding flash of orange light erupted from the balcony. The smoky trail of an unguided RPG-7 rocket slashed through the sky. It was a wildly inaccurate weapon, usually fired in desperation, but in the chaotic physics of urban warfare, luck was a currency the enemy had in spades. Cassidy watched in horrifying slow motion as the rocket intersected with Viper 2-2. It didn't hit the armored fuselage. It didn't strike the cockpit. The RPG slammed directly into the tail rotor, detonating in a catastrophic bloom of black smoke and shredded aluminum. The explosion instantly severed the tail boom. "Mayday, mayday! Viper 2-2 is hit! We are going down!" The panicked voice of Mitchell screamed over the tactical radio net. Without its tail rotor to counteract the torque of the main blades, the Black Hawk immediately went into a violent, uncontrollable spin. Cassidy's breath caught in her throat. The massive multi-million-dollar aircraft whipped around like a discarded toy, the whine of its failing turbines shrieking like a dying animal. Mitchell fought the controls with everything he had, attempting a desperate auto-rotation, but the alleyways were too narrow. The main rotor blades smashed into the side of a concrete apartment building, shattering into 1,000 pieces of deadly shrapnel that rained down on the streets below. Gravity took the rest. The Black Hawk plummeted. It hit the ground with an earth-shattering crunch that vibrated through the foundation of Cassidy's factory building. A massive, choking plume of brown dust and pulverized concrete exploded into the sky, swallowing the wreckage entirely. "Viper 2-2 is down," Brooks yelled into his headset, his voice cracking. "I repeat, Viper 2-2 has crashed in Sector Charlie. Grid coordinates. Follow." Silence fell over the city. For 3 agonizing seconds, the gunfire stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, the swarm woke up. Through her thermal imaging, Cassidy saw the heat signatures of dozens, then perhaps 50 or 60 armed insurgents pouring out of the surrounding buildings. The crash had acted like a dinner bell. They were converging on the downed chopper from every direction, moving through the alleyways like water flooding a cracked hull. "TOC, this is Overwatch." Cassidy spoke into her mic, her voice chillingly flat. "Viper 2-2 is down in the meat grinder. We have massive enemy movement converging on the crash site, requesting immediate QRF." The voice of Captain Gregory Adler, commanding the operation from a secure bunker 20 miles away, cracked back over the encrypted channel. "Copy Overwatch. Quick reaction. Forces spinning up now. Be advised, QRF is 30 mics out. All ground elements hold your perimeter. Do not, I say, again, do not push to the crash site. The sector is overrun. Hold your positions." Cassidy stared through the scope, her finger resting lightly against the trigger guard. The dust was slowly beginning to settle around the twisted, burning carcass of Viper 2-2. The helicopter was resting on its side, the fuselage buckled and groaning under its own weight. Suddenly a flicker of movement caught her eye. Inside the shattered greenhouse of the cockpit, someone was moving. It was Mitchell. The pilot was alive, trapped upside down in his harness, frantically trying to kick out the reinforced glass. To the rear of the aircraft, the side door was pinned against the earth, meaning Miller and the rest of the crew were trapped inside the crushing metal tomb. "They're alive," Cassidy breathed. "Chief," Brooks said nervously, his eye glued to his spotting scope. "I've got 20+ armed hostiles pushing down the main avenue. They're 2 blocks away. They'll be on the bird in less than 5 minutes." Cassidy calculated the math. QRF was 30 minutes away. The enemy was 5 minutes away. When the insurgents reached that helicopter, they wouldn't just kill the crew. They would drag them through the streets. She had seen the videos. She knew exactly what happened to captured pilots in this part of the world. "Captain Adler." Cassidy keyed her mic, her tone urgent but entirely devoid of panic. "The crew is alive, but pinned. Hostiles are closing rapidly. If we wait for QRF, they will be overrun. Request permission to displace and establish an overwatch point closer to the crash." "Negative, Chief O'Connor." Adler's voice snapped back, laced with the rigid authority of a man looking at a drone feed rather than the blood on the ground. "You are 800 meters out. To reach a closer vantage point, you would have to move through hostile, unsecured streets. The QRF will handle it. Stay in your nest. That is a direct order." Cassidy slowly lowered her rifle. She looked at Brooks. The young spotter swallowed hard, his eyes wide, waiting to see what the veteran SEAL would do. He knew the regulations. He knew the penalty for abandoning an overwatch position during a firefight. It was a court-martial offense. It was the end of a career. Cassidy reached up and clicked off her tactical radio. "Chief," Brooks asked, his voice trembling. "What are you doing?" "My comms just went down, Brooks. Did yours?" Brooks stared at her, the realization dawning on him. He looked at the radio on his chest rig, then looked down at the crash site. He slowly reached up and switched his radio off. "Yeah. Weird. Must be the interference from the crash." "Stay on the glass," Cassidy commanded, swiftly unhooking her ghillie suit and shrugging off the bulky camouflage. Underneath, she wore a lightweight plate carrier and desert fatigues. She slung the heavy Mark 13 sniper rifle over her back and drew her suppressed Mark 25 sidearm. "You are my eyes. Give me vector coordinates through the secondary channel only if they flank me. If QRF arrives, you play dumb. You lost me in the dust." "Chief, you can't go down there alone. It's a suicide run." "There are 4 men bleeding out in a metal cage, Danny," Cassidy said, her green eyes locking onto his with terrifying intensity. "I am not sitting here watching them die." Without another word, she turned and sprinted for the factory stairwell. The descent was a blur of tactical precision. Cassidy vaulted over rusted machinery and sprinted down the concrete steps, her footfalls entirely silent. She hit the ground floor and slipped out the back exit into a narrow, trash-strewn alleyway. The heat of the street hit her like a physical blow, carrying the acrid stench of burning jet fuel and raw sewage. She began to move, navigating the labyrinth of the city with the deadly grace of a predator. She didn't run wildly. She bounded from cover to cover, slicing the pie around blind corners, her suppressed pistol leading the way. 3 blocks away, the sound of shouting erupted. Cassidy pressed herself flat against a crumbling brick wall as 2 insurgents, heavily armed with AK-47s and chest rigs full of grenades, sprinted past the mouth of the alley, making a beeline for the crash site. They were careless, blinded by the adrenaline of the kill. As the second man ran past, Cassidy lunged. She grabbed his chest rig, pulling him forcefully into the shadows of the alley. Before he could cry out, she drove her combat knife upward, sliding the blade cleanly under the edge of his ballistic helmet. He went limp instantly. She lowered him silently to the ground, stepping over his body without missing a beat, and continued her advance. The twists and turns of the city felt endless, but the towering plume of black smoke served as a grim beacon. As she rounded the final corner, throwing herself behind the rusted-out husk of an abandoned civilian car, she finally had eyes on the target. Viper 2-2 lay in the center of a small, dusty plaza. The tail was completely gone. Small fires licked at the engine cowlings, and they had arrived. A group of 6 insurgents had just breached the perimeter of the plaza. They were laughing, pointing their rifles at the shattered cockpit. Inside, Cassidy could see Warrant Officer Mitchell. He had managed to kick away the glass and had drawn his service pistol, but he was still trapped in his seat, bleeding heavily from a gash on his forehead. The lead insurgent raised his AK-47, aiming it directly at Mitchell's face. He wasn't going to capture the pilot. He was going to execute him right there. Cassidy didn't have time to unsling her sniper rifle. The distance was 50 yards. She raised her suppressed Mark 25 pistol, acquiring the sight picture in a fraction of a second. She exhaled smoothly, letting the air escape her lungs, and pulled the trigger. What? The suppressed round struck the lead insurgent directly in the temple. His head snapped back, and he collapsed onto the dirt like a puppet with cut strings. The remaining 5 men froze, confusion flashing across their faces as their leader dropped without a sound. They looked around wildly, their rifles sweeping the empty rooftops, completely unaware of the lone woman crouching behind a rusted car on the ground level. Cassidy dropped the magazine from her pistol, smoothly slapping in a fresh one, and drew her combat knife in her offhand. The rules of engagement had just vanished in the smoke. Command was miles away, blind to the truth. Out here in the dirt and the blood, there was only the crew of Viper 2-2, the swarm and the ghost that was about to hunt them all. The remaining 5 insurgents had exactly 2 seconds to process the sudden death of their leader before Cassidy moved. She didn't stay static behind the rusted car. Static meant death. She pushed off the pavement, driving her legs forward in a low crouch, moving laterally to change her angle of attack. Her Mark 25 barked twice more. Foot. The second insurgent took a round to the collarbone and another to the throat, choking on a scream as he collapsed backward into the dust. The third man finally registered the direction of the threat. He swung his battered AK-47 toward the moving shadow, his finger mashing the trigger. A wild spray of 7.62mm rounds chewed into the concrete and asphalt around Cassidy, kicking up stinging clouds of debris. Cassidy dove, tucking her shoulder and rolling over the hood of a decimated taxicab. As she came up on the other side, she dropped her pistol, transitioning seamlessly to the heavy weapon slung across her back. The Mark 13 sniper rifle was a precision instrument, not meant for close-quarters battle, but at 30 yards, the .300 Winchester Magnum round it fired was absolutely devastating. She racked the bolt, seated the buttstock firmly into her shoulder, and fired. The roar of the unsuppressed Magnum cartridge in the enclosed plaza was deafening, a concussive shockwave that shattered the remaining intact windows of the adjacent buildings. The round struck the firing insurgent dead center in his chest rig. The sheer kinetic energy lifted him off his feet and threw him backward into a concrete wall. The final 2 fighters broke. Panic overrode their zealotry. They turned and sprinted toward the alleyway they had just come from. Cassidy racked the bolt again, exhaled, and dropped the 4th man with a shot that severed his spine. The 5th vanished around the corner, his terrified shouts echoing down the street to alert the rest of the swarm. The immediate perimeter was clear, but the clock was ticking faster now. She had lost the element of surprise. The gunshot had just broadcast her exact location to every hostile within a 3-mile radius. Cassidy sprinted across the open ground, her boots crunching over shattered glass and twisted metal, until she reached the mangled cockpit of Viper 2-2. The heat radiating off the burning engine block was intense, singeing the fine hairs on her arms. Inside the shattered greenhouse of the cockpit, Warrant Officer Bradley Mitchell was gasping for air. His helmet was cracked, and blood poured freely from a deep laceration above his left eye, blinding him on one side. He squinted through his good eye, his service pistol shaking in his grip, as he aimed it at the dark figure looming over him. "Friendly Mitchell, I'm friendly," Cassidy shouted over the crackle of the flames, keeping her hands visible. Mitchell blinked, lowering the weapon slightly. He stared at her, uncomprehending. He saw the tactical gear, the plate carrier, the unmistakable silhouette of an American operator, but the voice belonged to a woman. Who the hell are you?" he coughed, tasting copper. "Chief O'Connor, Overwatch Element," she said rapidly, holstering her pistol and pulling her combat knife. She leaned into the crushed cockpit, her hands working with lightning speed to slice through the heavy nylon webbing of his flight harness. "We need to move, Warrant Officer. Now." "Miller." Mitchell groaned, reaching a bloody hand toward the rear of the cabin. "Miller is in the back. The bird rolled on the doors. He's trapped under the gun mount." Cassidy grabbed Mitchell by the trauma handle on the back of his vest and hauled him out of the shattered windshield frame. He collapsed onto the dirt, his legs barely supporting him. "Can you shoot?" Cassidy demanded, shoving an extra magazine from her belt into his hands. Mitchell wiped the blood from his eye, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, I can shoot. Cover the South Avenue. Shoot anything that isn't wearing an American flag," she ordered before scrambling up the inclined side of the downed Black Hawk. The fuselage groaned in protest under her weight. Cassidy reached the top and peered down through the open right side door, which was now facing the sky. The interior of the cabin was a nightmare of tangled wires, crushed seats, and leaking hydraulic fluid. Crew Chief Wyatt Miller was pinned beneath the heavy detached mounting bracket of his M134 minigun. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Beside him, the lifeless body of the co-pilot lay motionless. "Miller, stay with me," Cassidy yelled, dropping down into the cabin. Miller's eyes fluttered open. "Chief, legs are pinned. Can't feel 'em." "I'm getting you out," Cassidy said. She braced her back against the floor of the cabin and put both boots against the heavy steel minigun mount. It weighed nearly 200 pounds, and the twisted fuselage was wedging it firmly in place. Outside, a fresh chorus of shouting erupted. The unmistakable rattle of AK-47 fire began to echo down the adjacent streets, accompanied by the heavy rhythmic thumping of a .50 caliber DSHK machine gun mounted on an approaching technical truck. The swarm had arrived. "Chief!" Mitchell yelled from the plaza below, popping off 3 rounds from his pistol. "We have company west sector moving fast." "Push!" Cassidy screamed to herself. She engaged every muscle in her legs, her thighs burning as she leg-pressed the massive steel mount. The metal shrieked against metal. For a second, it didn't budge. Then, with a sickening crunch, the bracket shifted upward just enough. "Pull yourself out now," she commanded. Miller grabbed an overhead handle and dragged his upper body forward. His legs slid free just as Cassidy's muscles gave out, sending the heavy steel crashing back down to the deck. She didn't waste a second. She grabbed Miller by the webbing of his vest and hoisted him upward, shoving him out the top hatch before hauling herself up after him. They slid down the sloping side of the helicopter and hit the dirt just as the first wave of insurgents flooded the plaza. There were at least 30 of them pouring out of the shadowed alleyways and swarming the surrounding rooftops like disturbed hornets. Leading the brutal charge was a battered Toyota pickup truck, a massive DSHK anti-aircraft gun bolted crudely to its bed. "Get behind the engine block," Cassidy roared, dragging Miller by his vest behind the thickest, heavily armored section of the downed helicopter. Mitchell scrambled in beside them, his face pale and streaked with blood, but his eyes locked in lethal focus. The air erupted into a deafening storm of lead. Bullets sparked against the wreckage of Viper 2-2, tearing jagged holes through the thin aluminum skin. The heavy .50 caliber rounds from the technical truck pounded the asphalt, ripping up chunks of concrete the size of softballs, and sending lethal shrapnel flying in every direction. Cassidy unslung her Mark 13. This was no longer a stealth operation. This was a desperate siege. She crawled to the edge of the engine, cowling, resting her rifle barrel on a twisted rotor blade. She tuned out the chaotic noise, the blistering heat, and the overwhelming odds. She retreated into the cold, calculated mathematics of her Tier 1 training. Distance 180 meters. Wind negligible in the urban canyon. Target gunner on the technical. She found the man in her crosshairs. He was screaming a battle cry, his finger holding down the butterfly trigger of the heavy machine gun. Cassidy exhaled smoothly, squeezed. The violent recoil punched her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the gunner's chest explode backward. The DSHK fell silent, its heavy barrel pointing uselessly toward the sky. Before the insurgents could react, Cassidy swiftly worked the bolt and fired again. A fighter, hoisting an RPG, on a third-story balcony, pitched forward. The live rocket tumbled harmlessly into an empty dirt alley before detonating in a massive shower of pulverized brick. "Brooks, talk to me." Cassidy barked into her earpiece, praying the short-range radio was still functioning. Static hissed violently. Then the terrified but steady voice of her spotter broke through. "Chief, I see you. You are completely surrounded. They're flanking through the butcher shop at your 3 o'clock. Copy, Cassidy said flatly. She dropped the empty 5-round magazine from her Mark 13 and slammed a fresh one home. Mitchell, watch our 3 butcher shop. Mitchell shifted, raising his pistol. 2 insurgents kicked open the side door of the shop, raising their AK-47s. Mitchell fired 4 times in rapid succession, dropping both men in the doorway before they could squeeze their triggers. But the sheer volume of incoming fire was overwhelming. A stray round skipped off the fractured pavement and grazed Cassidy's bicep, carving a bloody furrow deeply across her skin. She barely registered the sharp pain. The massive dose of adrenaline flooding her system pushed the agonizing burn to the back of her mind. She fired again and again, her bolt-action rifle punishing the advancing wave with terrifying precision. Every trigger pull was a guaranteed kill. She operated like a machine, a phantom of death, standing her ground in the shadow of the ruined Black Hawk. But even machines run out of fuel. Cassidy reached for her chest rig to grab her last magazine, only to find the tactical pouch empty. She had fired 30 rounds of .300 Winchester Magnum. She was completely Winchester. "I'm out on the long gun," she yelled, slinging the weapon and drawing her Mark 25 sidearm. She checked the magazine. 7 rounds left. Mitchell looked at her, his own weapon locked open on an empty chamber. He had nothing left. Miller, leaning weakly against the burning wreckage, held a blood-soaked combat knife in a trembling hand. The deafening gunfire from the insurgents suddenly faltered. A heavy silence descended over the plaza, broken only by the crackle of the burning helicopter. Through the thick black smoke, Cassidy saw the shifting silhouettes tightening the noose. They knew the Americans were out of ammo. They were preparing to rush. "Chief," Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He looked at her, the grim reality of their situation settling over him. "You shouldn't have come down here." Cassidy gripped her pistol with both hands, her green eyes fixed on the smoke. "Command told me to sit on a roof and watch you burn Mitchell. I don't follow orders that get my brothers killed." A guttural war cry went up from the insurgents. Dozens of men broke from cover, charging blindly across the open plaza, bayonets and machetes raised high. They were 20 yards away. 15. Cassidy raised her pistol, preparing to take the first 7 men with her to the grave. Then the sky tore open. It didn't sound like a helicopter. It sounded like a giant tearing a sheet of heavy canvas in half. Brrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr slammed into the plaza, drawing a line of absolute devastation straight through the charging insurgent line. The earth shook so violently that Cassidy was thrown hard to the ground. The concussive shockwave of the A-10 Warthog strafing run blew the thick smoke clear out of the courtyard. Before the dust could settle, the deafening thud of heavily armored rotors filled the air. 2 MH-60L direct action penetrators swept low over the rooftops, their side-mounted rockets and miniguns unleashing hellfire on the surrounding buildings. Viper 2-2. This is QRF lead. A booming voice thundered over Cassidy's earpiece. Keep your heads down, we are painting the town red. Cassidy lay flat in the dirt, her chest heaving, the warm blood from her arm soaking into her sleeve. She looked over at Mitchell and Miller. Both men were staring up at the sky, laughing through their tears as the aerial cavalry ripped the insurgent stronghold to pieces. Within minutes, heavy striker vehicles smashed through the roadblocks, rolling into the plaza. Heavily armed rangers poured out, securing the perimeter with brutal efficiency. Medics sprinted toward the downed bird, immediately going to work on the wounded. Captain Gregory Adler stepped out of the lead striker, his uniform perfectly clean, marching straight toward Cassidy. Chief O'Connor, Adler barked. You deliberately disobeyed a direct order. You abandoned your overwatch position. I will see you stripped of your trident and court-martialed for this Mitchell shoved past the medics, limping to stand directly between Adler and Cassidy. "With all due respect, sir," Mitchell rasped. "If she had followed your orders, you'd be putting 4 of your men in body bags right now. She's the only reason we are breathing. You want to court-martial her. You go through me and every operator in this task force." Adler stopped looking around at the hardened glares of the Rangers and SEALs surrounding them. He swallowed hard, the anger draining away, and gave a stiff nod. "Get the wounded loaded up," he muttered. "We're going home." Cassidy exhaled a shaky breath, the adrenaline leaving her system. As she watched Mitchell and Miller being loaded into the transport alive, she knew she wouldn't change a single second of it. If this gripping story of sacrifice and relentless courage kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Every soldier's bravery deserves to be recognized. Share this incredibly intense tale with your friends to honor the unbreakable bond of those who refuse to leave their team behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our thrilling, real-life tactical breakdowns and dramatic battle stories.